Welcome back to the inaugural UNCTAD Gender and Development Forum. My name is Tonya Haynes, and today I'm bringing you a powerhouse of a panel for this Africa-Caribbean regional, cross-regional dialogue looking at gender and the creative industries. With me in studio, I have the prolific, hyper-prolific, vibrant, contemporary artist from Barbados, Sheena Rose. I am also joined by Shanika Burnett, a textile artist, fashion designer, extraordinaire, and our counterparts from the African continent. We are joined by business strategist Rehema Issa from South Africa, who is going to tell us a bit more about Womanonics Africa and the excellent work that she has been doing centering and promoting African women's voices. And from Ghana, of course, you know, we have our cousins. We have Araba Opoku, who is a visual artist and working at that intersection of visual art and also fashion. So welcome to you all. It's really a sincere honor and a privilege to be moderating this cross-regional dialogue with such a dynamic group of speakers. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, so
Thank you for having us.
Thank you so much. I want to begin with you telling our global audience a bit about who you are and what is the driving force behind your practice. That's the artistic, creative work, but also the work around entrepreneurship and business strategy. What is the motor that is making all of the diverse things that you do in different spaces? What is the driving force behind that? And I want to start first with Rehema Issa from South Africa.
Thank you so much. For many years, I used to say, I am a storyteller. And it didn't get traction, actually. It was something that was frowned upon. I found that I had to explain what I meant by saying that I am a storyteller, to the extent that about 8 years ago, I started up the business that I called a storytelling factory. And it really was a culmination of a number of years working in strategy, business development, women economic development, and women enterprise development. And the realization that the narrative of the African woman tends to follow a particular script, which was very different to the reality on the ground of what that contemporary, modern, educated, well-traveled, really power-hungry, well, not hungry, but power set and globally oriented African woman was about. And I found that in doing these strategy sessions, not just in defining their blue skies, but also, you know, coming in with a lot of humility after the process and appreciating that African women were geared for global access, they were geared for global business. But the narrative of the world that intersected with African women still had the notion and the narrative of African women need development. African women are less than. African women do not know what they're doing. And that also defined how the world of development was interacting and intersecting with African women, defining strategies or defining support that was really looking at, we need to start up women businesses. And there was a missing layer, a missing middle of African women who has been in business for a number of years, who has been doing intra-Africa trade already, who has been doing global trade, that was missing out on support and ecosystems to grow for greater global engagement. And I think for me, doing stories, and I mean, I'm a TEDx licensee, and one of the things that I do is find ways to find those stories and find ways to give African women voice, particularly in a digital era that facilitate this access by everybody for free to this information. So 85 women over the last 6 years telling their stories in their own way. But I've also been a publisher, finding African women's stories, going out and trying to find the voices and ensuring that those voices are communicated authentically. And there's been a continuous thread, whether I'm doing strategy or storytelling in one way or the other, which was that the voices of African women need to be amplified for them to have an equal playing field, but rather for the world to intersect with them where they are. And what we found in the last few years, you asked me what drives me. It's the power of storytelling, the power of telling where women actually are, with that level of authenticity that allows you to connect with the heart and soul of who they are, but importantly with the economics of what they bring to the table. And that's at the heart of what Womanomics Africa is, which is our latest 3-year-old venture, an appreciation that unless African women are operating in sustainable, resilient ecosystems as drivers of economic highways, we will remain the beneficiaries of stories being told about us and not the champions of what the world engages. And so we exist to connect African women and the world to information and insights that are commercially usable and sound. We exist to connect African women to capacity building in order to help them develop and grow their businesses from a base of appreciating that they were already ready to grow. It's just that extra scale up journey. And we exist to create an ecosystem of support of players, whether it's financiers, whether it's development partners. And together as an ecosystem, we create the base of strength for African women to grow intra-Africa, but also as a base of connection for the world to do business with African women. That's what keeps me going, the real story of the businesswoman in Africa today.
Wow, thank you so much. And you know what I really loved about how you introduced both yourself, but also this dynamic and wide-ranging work that you have been doing is to connect it to stories, because stories and storytelling are so powerful and are such a big part of who we are, right? And how we also transmit who we are and assert who we are within the world. And so I like that the storytelling and the creativity of that is where the storytelling and the economics meet. So you have that art, that creativity that is central to our economies and grounded in the fact that when it comes to cross-border trade in Africa, women have always been at the center of it. And that reclaiming of that center and that storytelling is extremely powerful. I want to shift now here to the Caribbean, to a visual storyteller of our own, to tell us a bit about what is also animating your practice, Sheena.
Okay, so I too am a storyteller, but a visual artist. So I work with painting, drawing, performance art, anything that I could grab into my hand and transform it into like an idea and into like a story too. So what happened, I really just like reflect and look at myself and see myself as a Black woman from Barbados and questioning my position living in Barbados and also the global space. So when I say I'm a storyteller, it comes to my personal story and then trying to see how to translate it onto these materials, but to see how people can relate to it and also learn from it. I am tired of people seeing us as this stereotype from the beaches, the sand, the coconut trees. So what I do is I try to show the everyday of our lifestyle. And also whenever I travel, so I have shown internationally, I have shown in museums, galleries, I mean, very important collections, private collections. I was in biennales, in art fairs and TV shows and many more. And what I do is sometimes portray myself as different characters to give the obvious of where I'm from or sometimes surprise people. So I'm surprised. I was always interested in art when I was like 5, 7 years old. And then as I grew up, I wanted to be a cartoonist. So that means storytelling was always there in my work. But then later on, when I did my bachelor's, my associate, my bachelor's, and then my master's, I started to ask that question of, who am I? What's my role? How do I add or take away into this space? So people started calling me feminist, and I didn't quite understand what I was or is. And then eventually I call myself a feminist, then an activist, then many other factors along with it. Plus, most importantly, artists. Another factor too that I also have to shout is people always think you have to be somewhat like a scholar, a lawyer, a doctor, and so on. So I also have to vocalize and say artists also play an important role in the space. So that is my contribution. And also it feels as though that's my job to do. So yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for that, Sheena. Again, this connecting a very powerful personal stories as a way to, build bridges across the globe, and also that very important work of telling your own story and standing in the power of self-definition. I want to turn to your counterpart in the visual arts. In many ways, she's straddling the two areas that you and Shanika working primarily, both visual art and fashion. And Araba, if you can tell us about your practice and what motivates all the different, the constellation of things that you are doing.
Okay, so my practice is definitely pushed by a lot of complexities in my society. Also, it's mostly autobiographical, so it's like experiences that I experience. So it's also storytelling in a way. So I am basically telling the stories I experience or stories I share with my friends and my counterparts. So that's what pushes my work, basically. Yes. And I am mostly focused on the visual art aspect of my career right now. So that's what I'm focusing on. That's what I'm working on. I've been doing art for, well, as long as I can remember. I think I developed a passion for it in class 6. And since then it has grown and it keeps on growing. I basically focus on painting currently, but I do intend to move to installations soon enough. So that's basically me. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Araba. And over to you, Shanika.
Well, I grew up in a artistic household. My mom was a textile artist. My dad is a calabash carver. So I grew up in the cultural community in Barbados. I spent a lot of time at craft fairs, expos, working amongst artists in the art gallery. So I always grew up with the arts and the culture around me. I really, really became inspired in fashion when I was around 7, 8 years old. And when my mom bought me a little sewing machine and I started making little clothing for my dolls. And that really grew at secondary school, where I would not be able to find appropriate clothing, because I also grew up in a Rastafari family, which is traditionally a bit more, I don't want to say restricted, but a bit more conscious of exposing clothing. So I would create a lot of alternatives to the things that would be in fashion at that time. And that kind of really sparked my interest in making clothing. Approaching graduation time, I found great difficulty in finding the type of fabrics that I really wanted for my dress, because I wanted something that was African inspired, but not African print specifically. And that is where my interest in textiles and using the textiles that my mother would have created and making clothing from them. And that really inspired me to try to create an aesthetic that is Caribbean in particular, using the influences that I would have from my own background, which would be a more Afro-Caribbean perspective, but also marrying a more modern perspective, which I have as a young independent woman in Barbados. So that is what really inspired the aesthetic of my clothing. I also really like to experiment with a lot of natural materials, and I think that would have really come from my background, where we are, very we are very resourceful and find different uses for different products. So I like to work with calabash, coconut fibers, and unexpected materials to kind of try to merge them into fashion. Over the last couple of years, I've been leaning more to exhibition pieces that would not be necessarily deemed wearable. And when I would have started years ago, there wasn't really a market for it. But I've been very inspired by technology and the way the world is going now to really let my creativity flow and create things that I'm really passionate about. And like explore different parts of the creativity which might not be as commercial in the usual sense of the word. So that's really motivated me to try to explore different things. I also want to mention one of the major things also is that I see myself as an environmentally friendly designer. So I focus on using natural fibers. All of my dyeing, I look to use the best processes which are the least environmentally damaging. And I try to work with ethical manufacturers where the techniques and the labor practices are also in line with what I would want for myself. So I also think that that's very important to mention.
Thank you so much for that, Shanika. I want to pick up on the last thing you said, and I want to direct this question to Rehema. So you talked about, shifting, marrying technology with the creativity and creating some pieces, some more exhibition pieces, not necessarily wearable art and not necessarily the markets that are usually there for your work. And so, Rehema, I wanted, as a business strategist, as someone directing Womanomics Africa, how can we guarantee that women working in creative spaces are able to make a livelihood, and I mean to thrive, right? Not to sort of eke out a living, but to thrive in the way that we were all meant to thrive. What is necessary to ensure, particularly for women in the creative fields, in the artistic fields, what is the missing piece?
Having started and failed a couple of businesses along the way, and one of them being in the creative industry, I will be the first person to shout from the raftatops, ecosystem, 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 ecosystem. What we are not creating, particularly, and I'm speaking from my lens on this side of the world, what we haven't done is create the ecosystems that combine the entire value chain of support or the business line that we're in. It is not usual for, and we're typically talking startup or medium-sized businesses. It is not common that you'll find a business that runs its entire value chain end to end. And we tend to grow value chains looking at individual institutions. So we will grow Shanika's business or we'll grow Rehema's business, but we're not looking at the codependencies. And COVID has taught us this, right? COVID has taught us the vulnerability of value chains, and it has taught us where women's real participation in those value chains are. And so even in the recovery strategies, women are at the periphery edges. And so unless we are at the heart of those value chains, unless we understand where we participate. At Womanomics Africa, for instance, part of what we do is create sustainable value chains. And Oya Foods is a business that we started up in the middle of lockdown. But that was started up with a clear understanding that unless we understood that we were creating an end-to-end women-owned and managed value chain, we will play on the periphery without understanding where the power lies, where the money lies, and where the inputs and the powers of trade lie in terms of moving goods and services, inputs and support. So I think that the key to women gaining resilience is not to necessarily say, I'm playing at the top, but understanding the value chain end to end and understanding where you're playing in that, but growing and supporting coexistently. Or rather, at the same time, I'm forgetting the English word for that right now, concurrently, growing concurrently the value chain. So don't look at growing your business on your own. We make that mistake. We find hundreds of businesses doing the same thing without leveraging economies of scale, without leveraging opportunities for supply, without leveraging where the opportunities to support. And I think that she mentioned something that is key, which is the use of technology as a lever and as what I call an amplifier. So at Womanomics Africa, what we've done with technology is we are not in the business of technology, but technology is changing our game, because where we would have had to fly to country to host seminars and workshops, we've created a campus where people come to, and we've created an ecology of ecosystem partners where you can convene, which is at the heart of the starting point of engagement. And so it's being able to understand, how does technology support, elevate, and transform your business, and start now. If you haven't already, start now to speak to technology partners. It took us 11 years, by the way, to find the technology partner that could translate our requirements into a real solution. 10 years. We're live this year, June in 2011. But the idea of an ecosystem that was technologically driven started in 2010. So these are not things that happen overnight. Ecosystems that are resilient and strong don't happen overnight. You need to start to build those with a conscious effort towards understanding how money is flowing into your ecosystem and how money is flowing out and how it circulates within an ecosystem of support that is developing either other women or partners that actually grow your business.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that, Rehema. So much food for thought. I can see why you are a business strategist and also an entrepreneur and leading this very important work with Womenomics Africa. For me, what really stood out about what you said is the importance, this notion of growing an individual business in the app rather than growing an ecosystem where everywhere along the value chain, women and gender diverse people are on controlling every point along the value chain. And for me, I think that's very powerful to reflect on, because I always say for us in the Caribbean, our greatest strength is the creativity of our people. Like, the one thing that we have that we can offer to the rest of the world is the people and the art, the creativity, the fact that this is a part of the world where people have made so much, including new instruments, new genres of music, new religions and spiritualities out of a range of different, of the meeting, often violent meeting and confluence of different cultures and different people. And so that focus on ecosystems and the need to develop ecosystems rather than thinking of developing a single business. And I'm going to go to Sheena, who is a very celebrated artist. Her work she has, exhibited everywhere. But I want you to tell, I know that you launched a business about a year ago, right? And I want you to tell me why you felt it was important, as somebody who had been a practicing artist, a very successful artist, not just from the Caribbean, but globally as a contemporary artist, very successful, very recognized. What prompted the shift to thinking about your work as a business?
Yes, I started a company last year, and this will be going the second year. And I went into a company because for years it was asking for a gallery representative. And I never received one. So as time go by, as my career grew and the value of my work start to go up, I said, well, the only way that I will probably be taken more serious if I turn into a company. So I legit turned into a company, and I started to get bigger commissions as well. I started to do like large public art, so therefore that means bigger money. So legally speaking, when it comes to filing taxes and so on like that, I want to be legit, I want to be legal, and to show, well, hey, I have a company. And again, you know what's annoying to me? That before, when I first started, yes, I may be globally known and my name is still growing and stuff, but it was frustrating to convince people that I was a business. It was always exhausting to tell people I worth buying, art worth buying. Look into art is an investment. The culture that we grew up and born into is not really art savvy per se, and they see art as somewhat just the traditional way of the traditional houses and stuff, but also decorative. There's no insult to decorative art, but it is an insult that you just see art as that. So as time go by, I was getting exhausted of just convincing people I'm a businesswoman, I'm a businesswoman, I'm a businesswoman. I started off in a bedroom. Then eventually a dentist, Dr. Jefferson Clark, saw me in a bedroom. He offered me a studio space upstairs on top of his building, office. And then eventually I said, I want to be bigger. I want to be an international artist. I want to be this. I want to be a businesswoman. I want to be a scholar. I have received the Fulbright scholarship. I have been in major magazines and stuff, but it didn't feel like enough. It still feel as though people didn't still see me as this businesswoman. So I said, you know what? Let me become a company. So it became a company. Yes, as I mentioned before, public pieces came about, pub commissions, and so on. And then I created a team. I have a lawyer. I have a personal assistant, graphic designers. But then Corona came, and I had to reduce the team, and I had to rethink and see how to move about and so on. So in front of the scene, I look very successful. I look like if I'm in public spaces, public speaker, but behind the scene it's a lot of struggle. It's trying to understand how to get investors, how to build value more, how to still get gallery representative. It is a lot more than just painting and drawing. I read 36 books last year so that I could articulate better, so that I could be still taken seriously. So I feel as though I have a lot of things against me, but I'm very happy to be on this platform to see that they have us Black women, us from Africa and from the Caribbean, having more dialogue like this. So this is very encouraging and not as isolated and lonely to me.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Thank you so much for all of that, Sheena. You've said a lot here, and I want to turn to Araba. And, Sheena ended by talking about isolation and loneliness, and we heard Rehema saying how important ecosystems are to not just surviving, but to thriving, right? And Araba, if you can tell us a bit about what has been your experience as a practicing artist through the pandemic in Ghana, what is that like? Would you, the loneliness and isolation, is that part of it? I know you are leading a collective, so if you could tell us a bit of how you are navigating the art space from Ghana.
Okay, so I started officially doing art in 2018. So that's like after I finished high school, I went through a depressive state. That was equally lonely, so I had to stop doing art because I didn't have any support system. I mean, my mom was available, my parents were available, my sister was available, but it just felt wrong. There was no one actually pushing me to keep doing art. So after I started in 2018, I joined a collective. So I don't actually control or I'm not the owner or the leader of the collective. I just joined a collective, and since then they've actually been supporting me. But we're actually fewer girls in the collective, so it's kind of hard sometimes. And it's kind of hard sometimes finding someone to relate to on that level, like the struggles that you face as a woman in this industry or the art market in general. So being in the collective helped. It helped because everyone sort of pushed each other. We're supposed to do work where we have people checking up on us. Are we okay? Are we mentally stable? Do we need a break? Do we need like a holiday? All of that. So being in that collective actually helped me. But then there was a period when COVID came, everything like went on a standstill. Everything ceased to work or create because some of our collective members like also got COVID. So there was more of care and more of, are you okay? Is this working? Are you sure? Like, let me come and visit you. Let me come and help you with this. The art side of things was completely neglected because nobody could actually cope with art because there was so much happening in the world at once. It was just so depressing. So no one could actually cope with doing art or like focusing on their art skills to help them through that time. So that's what we did. And trying to come out of COVID and Ghana being recognized as a hub for Africa's art scene since I think 2019 or so, also sort of put pressure on the artists here. So how do I put it? Yes, so since COVID started, it's after the depressive state, and after that, all the artists sort of gathered together and were like, we need to push back, we need to get back on track. So that's what we've been doing since. We've been pushing each other. So I would say I do have a support system. It's not so lonely as I know other people have experienced. It's not so like, and so far, as much as I didn't see a lot of women artists being represented in, because I'm an emerging artist, I need to look up to a lot of women artists. I haven't seen a lot from my industry, especially in Ghana, because school, it was quite difficult to, but especially in Ghana, I haven't found or looked up to anyone. But growing in this industry so far, I've found other colleagues who are also in the arts industry, and created another support system for myself outside my collective. So that has also been helpful.
And Shanika, I want to extend what she was saying about what it means to be a practicing artist in a pandemic that has claimed so many lives and has disrupted global supply chains. In the case of Barbados, heavily tourism dependent, and then suddenly there are no tourists. And I know you mentioned at the beginning growing up in a Rastafari family, and that self-sufficiency has always been something that Rastafari has taught all of us in the region and indeed the world. And so my question for you is, what was it like for you now, still navigating art practice, fashion, making a living in a pandemic, especially in a place where now we depend on tourism and that has really dried up?
Well, it's difficult as it is for everyone else. The creative, we went through all the various emotions. As you would know, our store is located in Pelican Village, which is literally right at the door of the Bridgetown port, which would be one of the main entry points for the tourists in Barbados. So we had to kind of adjust our product. Before we would focus mainly on fashion and small products, which would be, like small things that tourists could pick up. So we've really been shifting our focus more into home furnishings as opposed to fashion. You're spending a lot more time at home. It really challenged us to pivot and to experiment, and it pulls it pulls something from inside of you that you don't realize that you have. And it's difficult, but I personally am trying to embrace it for my own mental health. I'm using it as an opportunity to experiment with different materials. Since I'm not pressed now for orders, we're experimenting with different product ranges. And even though the time has not really come yet for us to really put everything back out on the market, we are using this time to educate ourselves, learn, and try to grow in the meantime, so that's what I've been personally doing.
Thank you so much for that, Shanika. So at this point, because it is a dialogue, I do want to give you the opportunity, if any of you has a question for each other. I'm open to anyone who maybe you have a question for Rehema or for Araba, for Shanika, for Sheena. Anyone with a question? So Shanika, we'll see. Okay, Shanika's telling me let Rehema go first. So Rehema and then Shanika.
Oh, thank you so much, Shanika. My question is actually for you. I'm really intrigued by a couple of things that you've said. And one is about the environmental consciousness that you have in terms of your product line and what you're producing, and also the importance of the pivot, a post-COVID pivot. And you mentioned, moving to home furnishings. Are you finding? I guess I want to get a sense of the experience where you are, of how artists are coming in, and I guess again, I'm just creating another layer of understanding around art, not just being like your visual arts or the creation of arts and crafts, but are you finding in your space that artists are finding a new opportunity to lend their creativity to daily utility? And I'm curious about this because you moved to home furnishings, and having started up a food business is Oya Foods. one of the things that we are grappling with is the environmental aspect and being able to use natural products in terms of our packaging, being able to use natural products in terms of, the way things look, whether it's the boxes that we're creating or the packaging. And we need the creative industry to be involved in terms of how goods and services will finally look. And I just we are grappling with that, right? Locally, finding local producers or creatives to get involved in the journey, because the focus right now is so much of the hustle and getting by. Are you finding in that space an opportunity, or more artists in your space, or more creatives in your space willing to do slightly different things and to go into where utility is in demand, as opposed to, the creative products where it was more for, the luxurious, I would, for lack of a better word, to engage with? Is that what you're finding in your space, or is it really more like we are more, let's exist and let's get what we need, let's get food on the table? What's your experience on the ground?
I
Don't know if my
think,
question is clear enough, actually.
yes, I understand. I think largely a lot of artists have moved to more utilitarian aspects. So you would find people would try to make things that you would use. So for example, masks, that's a good example. Most designers in Barbados and anyone with a sewing machine basically made masks like from the
Yeah.
beginning to, recently in the pandemic. You're not seeing them as much now because I guess everyone is hoping things kind of go back to normal, but that would be a good example. I'm seeing a lot more artists create products that they would reproduce for purposes like on bags, or I don't want to use cheap products, but things like that. So I do see a space where artists are trying to come up with ways that they can still make money and still express themselves. But we have very small markets here in Barbados. So for us, and that's why I mentioned before a digital product, for us, I think that we need to find a way to export what we do without necessarily having to get on a boat or a plane, because our shipping prices are very, very expensive. So if we create a product that is not expensive, the shipping tends to be more than the actual cost of the product. And that is one of the challenges that I think most of us as artists and creatives who create actual products would be facing. And I had, my question for you was, because I had actually looked up your website, and I was very, very intrigued by the campus that you were just speaking of. And as I said, I've been doing a lot of research over the last year or so, and I've come across NFTs. I'm not exactly sure what they are, but I understand that it is a way that artists seem to be able to digitize their products, and you'll do more reading and stuff into it. But I was curious as to how, or if you think there is a way that we as artists can use a similar platform such as that to digitize and digitally market and sell our products. And is that a viable economic model? Like, is that something that you think could be feasible economically for us?
I'm going to sit up right? Because I love that question. And that's exactly what we've been grappling with, right? And we've been grappling with it because we're from the African continent and we're dealing with 55 countries with a very large geographic footprint. And, the value chains that we have coming in and out are not owned and managed by ourselves. So the question that we were trying to answer is, how do we connect African women to each other and to opportunities? And technology is definitely the answer. I mean, I say that unequivocally. Technology is the answer because the way technology has been designed today is that it allows you in your space to create, but recreate and present in a digital format for an audience that is outside of your world. And so literally the universe or the campuses or the malls have moved online. And if they've moved online, what does this mean for you as a businesswoman? So in terms of how we are using it, we then appreciate that the cost of an individual trying to use the system is literally like creating millions of Facebook users. You're literally creating a number of people designing these spaces. The power actually comes in creating ecosystems of similar businesses or similar-minded people, and that ecosystem attracts the nature of buyers and sellers and funders and partners, which allow you to engage in your own universe. That's the rationale of our campus, connecting African women to each other. And we say that we're really facilitating the kind of access that we thrived on in a real world, but also because of the reality of geographies. You mentioned the challenges of producing cheap products. I was into publishing. The challenges of shipping one book versus shipping thousands of books, or it's better for you to ship large machinery. But the reality of where we are doing business and how we're doing business as African women, businesswomen particularly, means that we've got to use the power of aggregation and leverage, but also create the kind of partnerships which mean that it's not necessary to own the whole value chain in one geographic location. So for me, it's the use and utility of an ecosystem becomes financially viable and financially a potential solution when there's an aggregation of partners with similar likes and with similar value proposition, and whose value proposition feeds into each other. Again, I know my whole conversation is about the ecosystem. I'm like an evangelist about that. And it really is about creating that ecosystem that allows you to attract audiences to that space. In the same way that you mentioned that you were at the entry of the port, that port had a reason for people coming through. You're recreating that in a virtual world. And I think that I defer to the comments made by Mark Zuckerberg recently around creating these kind of metaverses. That's what it is. The future of engaging, given the limitations of travel, which is a fundamental of trade, movement of goods, services, people, and money. You've got to find an alternative way to do that. And the movement of goods and services is still possible through shipping, but people is much more restricted. But money through cryptocurrencies and other digital currencies is possible. So the key challenge that a lot of women are facing is, where do I create this universe where it's not just me pulling people in, but how do I belong to an ecosystem where like-minded people are convening for purpose continuously? And that means that I have a shop front, so to speak, in an accessible space, but I also know that there is a reason for people continuously coming into that space. Simple answer, definitely. Metaverses are the way to go.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that, Rehema. As I heard you speak, I was thinking about the fact that, in essence, it brings us back to the market and the marketplace and, you know, this metaverse that might be digital, but at its core is what the marketplace meant. It was a place that you went for trade, but you also went for information. You went for information of all different kinds to organize, just in itself an ecosystem, and that we have to now seek to rebuild those and bigger, and also engage in technology. But I'm thinking, Araba, do you perhaps have a question for Sheena? You spoke about yourself as an emerging artist. Do you have a question for Sheena, or Sheena for Araba?
I actually sitting down here a little exhausted, to be honest. I'm exhausted of this new virus coming invade us, and we have to create the wheel. I'm being honest. I've been bombarded with this same information, not being rude, but I believe that physicality, I'm not saying that you dismissing it, but I'm kind of exhausted of that. Because certain particular people or people in position that have that information or have that privilege and so on, I see they're moving quickly. We live in a small space that I don't even agree with Shanika about if we have a market. I don't think so. I don't think we really have a market. And that way, I try not to I'm exhausted, sitting down, brainstorming, pulling my brain to see how to survive as an artist. I just want to paint and draw. You could simply digitize your work by a computer, or hiring a graphic person, or talking to a collaborator, or what we're doing right now. But I am exhausted looking for the answer. I just want to paint, I just want to draw, and I just want to see how to build my value. There is money out there. I live in a space that I see a lot of people lost jobs, and I see globally a lot of people lost jobs, and we have this illusion, most of us, that there's scarcely any money. In the art world,
just to come to
Araba.
Araba, I am envy of you because you have a community. I don't. We are struggling to like ourselves. We are crabs in the barrel. We are struggling to sell word, which is why I sympathize. I probably was ahead of time. I'm not perfect either, but I was thinking not to rely on tourists and to think beyond. And I am doing pretty well, but also struggling because people are scared and people are holding their money, but there is money out there. So I'm feeling a little bit, it's not being disrespectful, but I'm starting to get a little agitated because it feels as though you're scrambling to catch up with the trend, trying to catch up with the money trend, trying to catch up to keep your head above water. I'm tired. I just want to go out to my studio and paint and draw. And hopefully,
especially
I'm tired.
in terms of that we struggling to catch up. But back to the digital aspect of it, I think that we are way behind. Like we are now
agree.
actually trying to catch up to where the rest of the world would have been years ago. So in that aspect of it, I see people making money off of TikTok. Like I see people going around and cutting up one another clothes and recreating things, and they're making money. It's not just a hobby. It's not just like they're doing it for fun. So in terms of my thing, in terms of digitizing what I do, I that is that aspect of it that I'm looking at, as opposed to, because I guess for me and for my market, I want to create what I want to create, and as you know, Barbados, as you know, say don't have a market. People willing to wear what they're willing to wear. People are not necessarily willing to wear the crazy, outrageous things that they necessarily want to make.
How you go far is I can feel the authenticity of you. There are people, a lot of people on TikTok, on YouTube that are not authentic.
I agree.
And they hope they get the hits.
Yeah.
And most of them go home depressed because they hope they get the hits. We are here struggling, but at the same time, we love what we do.
It's true.
It's just
and that's why we still do it.
Sorry.
So Sheena, I wanted to pick up on something you said that I thought was very, very powerful, and I love having you here
I get very
on this
passionate.
conversation. Your passion is always permitted, and I also like that you are a disruptor. But one of the things that you said that I want us to bring us back to, you said, I am an artist. I just want to paint and draw. I do not want to have to be the one to figure out how I can thrive as an artist, being given the space to paint and draw. I'm tired having to figure out the markets, the business, how to make a living, how to get the bills paid. Don't come and ask me at this UNCTAD Gender and Development Forum what UNCTAD should do, because I want to paint and draw. I'm an artist. That is who I am, and I want to be able to, and I should be able to make a livelihood from that, and that is already enough. And for me, that's powerful, and I want to bring in Araba here. I want to bring back in Rehema here, and I know Shanika was in dialogue with you, but I want us to bring us back into that question, because we are talking about what gets called now popularly a lot the creative industries, and thinking about the making sure that artists can thrive, as the value of what artists do, economic value, artistic, creative, aesthetic value, spiritual value, immeasurable, right? And yet we have, as Sheena said, impossible to just do the thing that you are supposed to do. You're being called on to figure out all of these other things that you should not have to figure out. And so I want to pull you in, Araba, here and hear your voice on that. I also want to pull back in Rehema, who's talking about ecosystems, which I am understanding precisely to mean that the artist then should not have to be the one to do everything and to have all the answers. But Araba, if you can bring your perspective.
But with relying on an ecosystem, there has to be the building of trust. In my industry, and I'm sure everyone can attest to it, there are lots of sneaky people. It's not a genuine, there are people out there who would flip your art piece, your artwork for like an insane amount of money, and you get no cut. You do not get a share of that money. So there needs to be trust. You need to trust the patrons, the personnel that you'll be working with and interacting with. And that's difficult. That's really difficult. So I do not know how that can be solved because there are institutions that are ripping artists off for their pieces. Like, it's insane. I agree with what Sheena was saying, because I too just want to paint. I just want to get up and move to my studio and paint. I do not want to have to worry about what buyers want, what the trend is, because I was talking to an artist friend yesterday, and she was talking about how as a female artist, or as a Black artist, or like you identify as a woman artist, most of the time when you paint Black bodies, or like there's this figurative painting trend going around, when you paint that, they easily just chalk it down to, oh, you're expressing your pain or your experiences. Like it always has to be something like some misfortune about your life before it's there's patronage on it, basically. So I too just want to paint. I do not want to have to worry about all these things. Like, I don't want to have to worry about funding. I don't want to have to worry about basically just all this nitty-gritty stuff that do not help my practice, basically.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for that, Araba. And what I'm taking from what you said, that last bit about how, as a woman identified artist, a Black woman identified artist, this expectation, if you were to get support, that somehow all of your work is about trauma, pain, violence, and not being able to own your story in all of its complexities and contradictions, but the expectation that you have to produce a single narrative of yourself in order for that to be supportive. But so thank you for jumping in there. I'm going to go to Rehema back with this question of, I just want to paint and draw. I don't want to have to come up with the answers about how we ensure that women in the creative industries are thriving, are living their best lives, and not just the loneliness. We heard the term lonely, we heard the term struggling. Frustration. Rehema.
Sheena, girl, I feel you. I absolutely do. And I love it. And I love that there's an ability to have conversations about this authentically. And I think there's a term of the activist exhaustion. Like it seems like we're always fighting. And yet you're not. I actually don't want to talk a story about struggle, even though I'll be the first person to say there's a Swahili word. My parents are of Tanzanian origin. And the Swahili word is uhuru, which means freedom. And so I have to caution that for the Black woman, it's not yet uhuru. We are not yet at that point of freedom where we can sit on our laurels and things are going to work. As an African woman born after independence, I always say that I'm the first generation of the truly free. And being the first generation means that there's certain things that don't exist that I wish did, that I need to put in place. And so I think that's where the activism, somebody talked about that feminism and that activism still has to play a role. I would challenge an African or a Black woman right now who can live into her space and not claim that activism role, understanding how much needs to be put in place. But having said that, I think we need to come back to the fundamentals, right? We all want to rest. It's tiring, it's exhausting. If I didn't have to sit into one more development meeting about what needs to be changed, I'd be excited. And I hope that one day my daughters will sit in a room and be able to do business, just wake up and do what they need to do, what they love to do, and move on. We are the generation that needs to create that possibility and enable that possibility. And so how we're going to do that is by making sure that our reality gets voice, our reality gets airtime, and our truth gets spoken. And how we do that is in claiming the fundamentals of business. As creators, we forget one thing sometimes, that we are in the creative industry, which is a title and a label, but the product of creativity is intellectual property, and that is a tradable currency. And if we pause on that and we realize we have a tradable currency, we have the responsibility to do business according to business rules, which means we have to sit back and understand what needs to be in place for us to buy or sell fundamentals of economics. It's not pleasant, it's not easy. So I think Indra Noy is one of I've been quoting her this whole of last week in different sessions in coaching and development. And Indra Noy said something that I think really hits home for me, is her system of creating coping mechanisms. The stuff that we don't want to do, but the stuff that we have to do, they're the fundamentals and what I call the building blocks and the fundamentals of doing business. And if we don't like to do them, then we need to have people who can or bring on board. You talked about having lawyers, accountants on board. That is the reality. That is an ecosystem. When you're setting up your business structures and support systems, that is an ecosystem. We're just extending this and saying, rather than focusing on the ecosystem for your business alone, and therefore whether you pass or fail is just you, create that ecosystem for a number of other people. So you're sustaining livelihoods, but you're sustaining multiple businesses. And when one is thriving, one may not, but more importantly, all can thrive consistently and concurrently. And that is the key to success and to generational success, not a success that comes and once the business owner moves away, it doesn't go. You literally have to create the kind of sustainable success that can come in whoever is taking on and is just building on that. Our challenge is that we're coming in and we're building from the ground. Not everybody can do that. Not everybody's geared for that. That's why many of our entrepreneurs don't succeed, because it is a tough journey. But if we are walking that journey, we create the blueprint for those who come after to say, this is what you can do. And until we have uhuru, still a bit of a struggle, hey? Wow. I feel you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that, Rehema. As we wrap up, as we come towards a close, I want to give everybody an opportunity to either, repeat for them what's their takeaway from this dialogue, this opportunity to be in community with each other, to ground with each other in a way that was very open and honest and a space for sharing and learning. So you can either share what you're taking away from this space or the message that you want to share with all of our audience here at the inaugural Gender and Development Forum. So UNCTAD's first conference was in 1964, and we are now in 2021 and having a Gender and Development Forum for the first time. And that means something, right? It is a very historic space and a space that we have to make work for us and work for the gender justice and the just world that we are seeking to create, all the imbalances that we are seeking to right, including imbalances between the North and the South. And within countries. So I'll start with Sheena, and you can share either what you're taking from this conversation or what you want to share, what you want to put out there as part of this inaugural Gender and Development Forum.
I am feeling better, so thank you, ladies. I was feeling a little bit frustrated and angry, but then y'all calmed me down. I do have to remember the whole original idea of why I'm here on this planet is to draw, to paint, and share my experience. I understand that we have to be business people. I have to think of ways how to survive. But for my mental being and for my mental health and my happiness, I just want to get back to my core again. Mm-hmm. So I really, truly enjoy this. Thank you so much, ladies. Thank you, Tonya, for inviting me, for expressing how I feel. So, so yes, thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Sheena. I do think that just spaces where we get to sit with each other and share and learn across similarities and differences are so nourishing also to the spirit, because we were not meant to be alone. We are people who have to be in community. Shanika?
Well, what I'm taking away is that a lot of us face the same challenges, and what I'm hoping could come out of platforms like these and these type of discussions are the stakeholders and the powers that be, see how they could contribute, because like we are saying, as artists, we are the creative side, and although it is up to us as business women to find the way to manage all of the affairs of the business, I think that it would do better for the arts in general if from a institutional perspective, the education, the understanding can change. The respect can be really increased because we play a fundamental role. When we go through all of the ruins in history, you find the arts, you find the crafts, you find the reading. So we have a very, very great role to play in telling our stories and making sure that all of our voices are heard now and in the future. So I really appreciate the opportunity to be here. I'm hoping that out of this that we can do further collaborations and that we can really let this be the beginning of something for all of us.
Thank you so much for that, Shanika. When you talked about further collaborations, that is precisely, as I said at the beginning, this is really a powerhouse of a panel, and it is a fundamental privilege for me to be here and to sit amongst all of you. And I do think that future collaborations is where we can, what they say, put your money where your mouth is. All right, Araba.
Sorry, I muted myself for a bit. Sorry. So I am so grateful to be virtually seated here with you. I loved the whole conversation. I'm glad I learned a lot, especially from Rehema. You're very informative. My takeaway is basically focusing on building more ecosystems, like she said. Also, I am hoping that there are more policies and there's more awareness and more conversations around issues like this. Well, not issues per se, but us sharing our experiences and finding ways forward, moving forward, and how to help the younger generation coming in.
And Rehema, of course, you get the last word.
What a privilege. Thank you so much. And Araba, thank you so such beautiful words from you. I think for me, my last words are, I think as women, we need to remember to leverage the convening power of women. Women have been convening forever, but we don't tap into the commercial, economic power of that convening and translate it impactful enough. We often leave conversations in where the gaps are and what we need access to. And I guess for me, it's an invitation. Let's have this invitation for us as women to connect the dots for ourselves. And I guess being a champion and an advocate for Womanonics Africa, I'd be remiss without saying, well, find a way to connect three things, if nothing else. Connect to information and insights wherever they might be. Connect to development and support where you do need it. But most importantly, connect to an ecosystem and scale up your business. But don't forget you as the individual as the fundamental thing that you need to support and ensure that your health and your wealth are maintained properly. So connect to yourself and your soul, and the business will follow. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Thank you so much, Rehema. I am Tonya Haynes of the Institute for Gender and Development Studies, Nita Barrow Unit at the University of the West Indies, Cayfield campus. And I am joined by visual artist Sheena Rose, fashion designer Shanika Burnett, Rehema Issa of Womanonics Africa, and Araba Opoku, a visual artist from Ghana, at the inaugural Gender and Development Forum.